Today we're covering the top 10 best Ashes of War in Elden Ring. Now, not to be confused with the unique skills, we're going to be going over the regular skills, the ones that can be infused into multiple different weapons, not the ones that cannot be infused. But we're going to go over the top 10 best ones for PvE, and the ranking is based on how useful the Ash of War actually is. But yes, with that out of the way, let's just get started. Starting off at number 10, we have Ice Spear, which is a frost magic projectile attack, which for only 15 FP, you could do some really nice damage, do 25 stance damage, upwards of 200 frost buildup, and at point blank range, the starting up animation does actually get a hitbox, of which can do an additional 10 stance damage and an additional 100 frost buildup. So the entire combo at point blank can do like 35 stance and well over 300 frost. And you're doing amazing damage for only that 15 FP cost. It is going to scale off the intelligence and dexterity stat. Does scale a bit better off intelligence. So if you are going to go with a frost-based weapon that does get a good dex and int-based scaling, it is going to make for the best pairing. Which, as I always mention, frost is one of the best statuses in the game. It's a flat 10% damage to enemies, and they will take 20% more damage over the next 20 seconds. This thing actually also does get boosted by the Spellblade set as well, although in the DLC it's not going to be as useful as the Rakshasa set is just a direct upgrade. Now, the obvious downside of this skill is that it's not going to go that far for a projectile based option, and it's not going to be that quick of a projectile, so enemies can input read and dodge it a whole bunch. So against those really skinny and mobile enemies, you will notice that it's not going to hit as much as you would like, but against almost every enemy in the game, this thing can just utterly destroy them. Number 9, I want to cover some of these stance-based skills. I did just want to talk about wing stance, but I can't make a top 10 list and not include things like unsheath or square off because they're just amazing. Now, no, I'm not going to talk about overhead stance. I don't really value that one as much. It is definitely not the best option for a great katana, but when it comes to all these other weapons, these stance-based skills are probably just the best option. The reason why they're all really good is because they're so incredibly cheap, do good damage, and best of all yet, do high amounts of stance damage. Like, these are quicker and smaller base weapons that don't typically get as much as stance damage, but this just makes for a very good stance breaking option that pairs alongside a very quick, light, and easy to use weapon. Unsheath on the katana can do 30 stance damage in basically an instant. Square off heavy attack can do 40 stance damage, which this is a straight sword and is doing 40 stance damage, which that's more than like a charged heavy attack of a colossal sword. And wing stance actually like the most out of the bunch because it actually does get two different options that work very differently. One is going to be a triple swinging attack that does get about 23 stance damage. It is going to be nice to stun lock those smaller enemies, but the better one is going to be the heavy attack, which does a nice lunging poke, which actually does jump up in the air, so you actually can jump over certain attacks. And it lunges very fast, so it's very easy to use. And it does 30 stance damage, and it only consumes 10 FP. But the best part about this skill is it actually can combo in the light and heavy attack together. It's kind of just insane. So if you are using any of these three weapons, I think these stance-based skills are just going to make for the best pairings. Number 8, Flame Spear. Now, this weapon skill I consider to be like a direct upgrade of Flaming Strike. And Flaming Strike is already an amazing skill because it hits really hard and it does buff the weapon. But this one just does it consistently. And better yet, it actually does work with large weapons like Colossal Swords. And the fact that you can do this really quick poking attack that does high amounts of damage and buff the weapon for only 19 FP, there's not going to be many skills out there that are better than this one. Now, if you were using something like a curved sword that isn't able to be equipped with Flame Spear, then Flaming Strike is going to be your next best bet. But if you were to pick between the two, Flame Spear is just better. It can just hit harder. It does get good synergy with the God Freeze icon. And when hitting with it at point blank range, you could do almost 40 stance damage. And then for the next 40 seconds, you get plus 95 fire damage, which is just a better boost than Flaming Strike gives as well. And it actually just buffs it quicker. So if you actually did just want to use it for the buff, you could just quickly use the skill, just the uncharged version, and then you just benefit off the extra fire damage that way. Now, this is going to be a flame art based skill, so it is only going to scale off the faith stat, which might be unfortunate for strength based builds, because if it was a fire based skill, it would have a nice pairing with the strength builds, but it's still going to be perfectly fine either way because it does give that same plus 95 flat fire damage boost, and it still hits really hard and it still can hit at those further distances too. Number 7, Swift Slash. Now, both of the backhanded blade unique skills in Blind Spot and this one are just going to be S tier options. I do just like Swift Slash a little bit more. Yes, Blind Spot does get those instant iframes and it can trivialize a lot of different enemies, but the damage output isn't going to be that crazy. And against those larger bosses like dragons, something like Blind Spot isn't going to be that beneficial. But as for Swift Slash, this is quite literally useful in every single circumstance at any moment throughout the entire game. It is just that good. For only 16 FP, you can do this really quick lunging attack that does do some nice damage, does hit multiple times, does also do 10 stance damage, which is just as much as Blind Spot, but better yet, you can fully charge it to make it go way further, make it do way more damage, proc statuses even quicker, and do 20 stance damage. But like the major benefit is that you're going from A to B in such insane speeds that enemies are just not going to be able to keep up with you. You can just go teleport straight past them, do amazing damage, and just keep going back and forth, and they're just not going to be able to hit you. Now, this fully charge attack does have somewhat of a longer animation, but if you ever feel like you're about to get hit throughout the charging animation, you could just like let go and go in a different direction and potentially even dodge the attack. It's such an easy to use skill with so many upsides and very little downsides, it's hard to not put it in a top 10 list. Number 6, Lion's Claw, perhaps the easiest weapon skill to use in the entire game, and it has actually gotten better in this DLC. But for 20 FP, you do this quick front flipping attack that does high damage, high amounts of stance damage, depending on which weapon you actually pair it alongside with. A popular pairing would be with a Colossal Sword, of which is going to make it do about 37 stance damage. But best of all yet, and what makes it amazing and borderline broken, is the fact that you get infinite hyper armor. Like, as soon as you click the button, you're like never going to get staggered out of it. And it's just like guaranteed damage and guaranteed high stance damage every single time. Like, you don't even need to like read enemies' movesets or nothing like that. You just spam the button over and over again, and in most cases, you just are going to benefit. Now, a lot of people might say that Savage Lion's Claw is just a direct upgrade, but I do not think that is the case. Savage Lion's Claw might be better for like those longer openings, or if you're using like status effects or something like that, but Lion's Claw is just going to be a quicker first swing, and that first swing is going to do way more damage, do like twice as much stance damage. Like, the only downside is that Savage Lion's Claw, with that double swinging attack that it does get, is going to make it a bit more FP efficient. But if you end up finding an opening against a boss that lets you swing twice with Savage Lion's Claw, you're probably better off just using 2 regular Lion's Claw, because you're going to be doing way more damage and way more stance damage in that instance. So in my opinion, I just think Lion's Claw is just a better option through and through. But the reason why it has gotten better in this DLC is because of the Freya's Greatsword. This is a curved greatsword, of which does get the passive effect of getting boosted damage to your red main skills, which is going to include Lion's Claw, and that is 10% more damage. Now, putting Lion's Claw onto a curved greatsword is not going to be anything too amazing. You're always better putting it with like a colossal weapon or a colossal sword. It's going to do way more damage and way more stance damage. But if you have Freya's greatsword in your offhand, you still actually gain the benefit of that 10% boost. Now, the downside is that this weapon is still very heavy. It's at 14 units. So you have to spec into a decent amount of endurance just to benefit of that 10% more damage. So in some cases, it's probably not going to be that useful. But just know that it is a way to just get more damage out of Lion's Claw. Number 5, Stormblade. This is a quality-based skill, meaning that it is going to scale of either strength or dexterity, depending on which one they actually spec into. And for only 10 FP, it shoots out this really quick wind-based physical projectile that does some very nice damage, but best of all yet, you can just continuously spam it over and over again, and the DPS can just be insane. And with how quick the animation is, it barely has any risk, and it only consumes 6 FP for each additional cast. So not only is it just really high DPS, really easy to use, but it's so incredibly cheap. And it's like the skill doesn't really go that far. The distance is actually pretty decent. It's a nice way to just have a very good projectile attack with like a dexterity or a strength-based build. If you weren't going to use something like spells, you could just use this. And as I always mention, projectile attacks just cheese the entire game. It means that you don't really have to engage with an enemy or have to read its movesets. You can just keep running backwards and just keep spamming. But if you do use it at closer ranges, you are also going to benefit greatly because the weapon does get a hitbox. And if you do pair this alongside some harder hitting types of weapons like greatswords or whatnot, you're going to be doing so much more damage at close range. And this is going to help proc status effects too. So this skill was already amazing to begin with and was already a top 10 option in this game, but it's just gotten even better in this DLC because we now have the Enraged Divine Beast Talisman and the Divine Beast Helm. Both of these things just boost the damage of storm-based attacks. Now, me personally, I wouldn't pair it alongside the Divine Beast Helm because that has too many downsides. And not that it really needs it anyway, because the damage output is still going to be insane. So if you were running a dexterity or a strength-based build and you were lacking a projectile option, just throw on Stormblade. It's one of the best skills in the game. Number 4, Bloodblade. Now this skill is very similar to the Reduvia skill, but it's just in an Ash of War format that you can infuse into other weapons, meaning that it's just going to be a much better version of Reduvia, because it does consume half the amount of FP, half the stamina cost, can do more damage, more blood loss split up, and if you pair it alongside weapons like katanas, you're going to be doing much more damage at those closer ranges and just do more blood loss split up and more stance damage on top of that. The only downside is that it does actually decrease HP, unlike Reduvia, but it's only 50 HP, which at these higher levels, that's basically nothing. And with consecutive casts, when you spam it over and over again, it actually doesn't lose any HP. But this skill is just so incredibly broken because it does high amounts of blood loss split up, it's easy to spam, it's really cheap, and at these closer ranges, you're just doing monstrous amounts of damage. So this was once again already an S tier option, but it has gotten better in this DLC for a couple of reasons. One, because of Sacred Bloody Flesh, it's a new body buff item in this game that just further enhances bleed types of builds to just make you do way more damage. It's kind of like the Lord of Blood Exaltation Talisman, just in a consumable format, and it will stack with a talisman too. And there also is the Arnsbark set. This entire armor set does boost the damage of some bleed types of skills by 14%, and that does include Bloodblade. So if you were going to go into like a bleed arcane type of build, using something like the Scavenger's Curve Sword or the Nagakiba, this is probably going to be the best option. Number 3, CRAGBLADE, the best weapon buff in the entire game. For 60 seconds, you gain 15% more physical damage and 10% more stance damage. Having percentage-based weapon buffs are just always going to be better, because in this game, your AR can get really high. So only getting like plus 100 or 200 AR isn't going to really mean much when you have like 2000 AR. So just getting a flat 15% boost to physical damage is always going to be great. And just 10% stance damage is also really good. So it is going to make for an obvious pairing alongside charged heavy attack builds and guard countering builds, which both of these builds have just gotten better in the DLC. And they're just now some of the best build options to have. They're probably up there with like jumping attack builds and weapon skill spamming builds. They're just that good. But yeah, charged heavy attack builds were already insane, but now we have the two-handed sword talisman to just further enhance the damage. And the same thing could be said about guard countering. We now have the two-handed sword talisman and the deflect tier. Both of these things could just make CRAGBLADE perform so much better, and it's just going to be the obvious pairing. Any single weapon you want to use alongside the deflect tier that can be infused, just throw in CRAGBLADE. You're just going to benefit. A lot of people might use Royal Knight's Resolve because it can just do more damage per hit, but with CRAGBLADE, you don't have to worry about keep buffing it over and over again, and the bonus stance damage is going to be really good too. Number 2, CARIAN Sovereignty, the best damaging Ash of War in the game. That does pure magic damage and just destroys everything in the entire game. It is just an upgraded version of CARIAN Grandeur, except it can discharge quicker, just go further, do more damage, and get a follow-up input that comes out really quickly that just does just as much damage and almost just as much stance damage as well. The first swing doing 48 stance damage and the second's doing 43. So the entire combo is doing 91 stance damage, and you're hitting for this much damage at a longer distance, and you're also getting hype armor too. Like it's just stupid. Now the hype armor only does appear when you have larger types of weapons, so the best pairings with CARIAN Sovereignty would be with like a great sword or a great katana. Other types of weapons won't really get hype armor, where these ones would. But yeah, just throw in the Shard of Alexander, the Godfrey's icon, and everything is just dying. You can even throw in the Stone Barbed Cracks tier, of which is going to boost the stance damage by an additional 30%. And anything that has about 100 or 120 poise is just going to get stance broken in just one combo. So yes, not only is this the best magic Ash of War in the game, but it's just the best damaging Ash of War in the game too. Now for some honorable mentions, I want to talk about Blood Tax and Giant Hunt. It just really pains me to not put them on the list. Giant Hunt is probably my favorite pairing alongside a Colossal Sword. I like it even more than Lion's Claw because it does do more damage, it does do piercing damage, it's less FP, it's quicker, it does work as like a nice crouching animation too, so attacks can go over your head. But I don't think it's better than Lion's Claw because that one is just a lot easier to use. You get infinite hype armor and it lunges further. Like using that skill doesn't require any thought, whereas Giant Hunt, although it does get some nice hype armor, it's not going to be infinite hype armor. And as for Blood Tax, this is the most improved Ash of War in the entire game. It went from like an A tier skill to like a high S tier, and that's because of 3 separate reasons. One, it has amazing synergy with the Blood Sucking Cracks tier, and Blood Tax just heals you for so much that it can just completely negates the whole health draining mechanic. And number 2 reason, the Great Katana exists. It's such a hard hitting weapon that can proc bleed, and you can equip Blood Tax onto it. This weapon skill is normally for only like small thrusting types weapons, and it can be equipped on a Great Katana, and the speed of the skill is like the exact same. It's so fast, lunges very fast, stun locks those smaller enemies, does so much blood loss build up, and you're getting so much health regen too. And reason number 3, the Arnsbark set boosts this. As I mentioned before, to a lot of different bleed based skills, it's just going to boost the damage by 14%, and that includes Blood Tax. So with all these 3 things, you can just make for such a stupid build, and I really wanted to put Blood Tax onto the list, but there's so much broken stuff that I couldn't really do it. Number 1, Golden Vow. I know it's not the most like coolest pick in the world, but it's just the most useful Ash of War, so it's going to get number 1. That's the whole list. It's based on how useful it is, and any single time that you don't have a faith build to use the Golden Vow spell, you just use the Golden Vow Ash of War. Honestly, even if you do commit to a faith build, you can just use the Golden Vow Ash of War anyway, because this thing can be acquired right at the beginning of the game, and you can just slap it onto a dagger. You don't even need to have any requirements for anything. Just before every single boss or challenging encounter, just switch to the dagger, use Golden Vow, and for the next 40 seconds, you get 11.5% more damage and 7.5% more damage negation, and that's going to work as an aura buff, so it will stack with other types of body buffs, which there are a lot in this game, and it's going to boost the damage and damage negation of your allies too. So if you have a spirit summon, you could just use it alongside with them, and you're both going to benefit off the same damage and damage negation. It also is a pretty quick cast, so you can use it in the middle of a boss fight. Now, yes, there is the existence of the Golden Vow item, which this is going to be new in the DLC, and that is just a direct upgrade of the Golden Vow Ash of War. It does actually give a bunch more damage and damage negation, does last the same 40 seconds, and being that it's an item, it's not going to have any requirements, so it can be seen as an upgrade. However, one, it's at the DLC, not right at the beginning of the game, and you have to farm for it, and it's a very tedious farm, and you can only hold like a limited amount, whereas the Golden Vow Ash of War, you can use it over and over again, don't have to farm for nothing, just slap it onto a dagger and you benefit. Anyway, that is the list now done and completed. As always, let me know what your opinions are down in the comments below. Now, as for the next video, I'm probably going to make some more build types of videos. There's not really any other top 10s that I really want to make at this moment in time. If you do have any ideas yourself, just let me know down in the comments, or you could just ask me on Discord as well. I can go link that down below if you want to ask me questions there. But yeah, catch you guys around. Bye.